Good evening, and thank you all for coming. I'm Corby Skinner, director of The Writer's Voice, and we have done many readings here over the years. I was just thinking, John Clayton, what's that, 1992 when your first book came out?
You found me before I was writing books.
And we've been around a long time supporting writers. So, Taylor Brorby is the author of Boys and Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land. My good friend Terry Tempest Williams, this is what sort of excited me about it. I thought, oh, I'll look about the book, and I thought, like, wait a minute, this guy has a quote from Terry Tempest Williams. I have been waiting for this book. Boys and Oil is more than a memoir, it's a protest. Taylor Brorby has created a bridge between daydreams and nightmares, the gentle stirring of the prairie and the violence of the oil and gas industry. We see through the lens of a gay man how character and identity are shaped by the landscape that raise us. When I was reading the book, I realized I have read a lot of books about young people coming out, but I haven't read a book that deals so much with coming to terms with where you're from and embracing the landscape and then the environment. And I think that's really what I found to be so powerful about this book. Taylor's other books include Crude, a book of poems, Coming Alive, Action and Civil Disobedience. He's the author of Fracture, essays, poems, and stories about fracking in America. And his work has been supported by grants and fellowships from the National Book Critics Circle, MacDowell Colony, and the North Dakota Humanities Council. His work has appeared in numerous magazines and anthologies, and he's a contributing editor at North American Review and serves on the editorial board of Terrain and Hub City Press. Currently, he is the Annie Taylor Clark Fellow in Environmental Humanities and Environmental Justice at the Tanner's Humanities Center at the University of Utah. And you don't look old enough to have that job.
I'm old, Courtney. I'm old. I feel like it.
Please welcome, thank you for being here. Please welcome Taylor Brorby.
Can you all hear me all right? I'm good, just keep this little baby on. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I just don't want you to see my full, beautiful mustache or anything. Tonight should be sort of fun, I think. We'll have a hell of a good time. That's my goal. It's great to be in Billings. I grew up coming here often. Red Lodge feels like my second home. That Candy Emporium was a favorite place. But I would also, and I'm not doing it this month, we would always come to Billings to do back to school clothes shopping, since you all don't have sales tax, was one of these great things that my parents would, bring out me and a gaggle of other cousins. Billings is in this book, if you haven't read this yet. I am at some point going to read a little bit from my book to you, but I'll just leave that there for you to find later when you're perusing my sentences, I guess. You can just imagine coordinated, and I can get back up on this because I have a family member in the audience, coordinated fashion shows with our back to school clothes happened in Billings in the late 90s, so just imagine that. But to give you a little bit of backstory with this book and what I think I'm up to, though I would have rather Corby just tell me everything. When you're a writer, most of the time you begin on page 1, you have no clue what the hell you're doing. You're just letting it rip and hoping it works and pounding your head against the wall. But when I've looked at the bookshelf of American letters, and I've asked good writing friends, Terry or Pam Houston, so these American Western writers, can you name a memoir about growing up in this vast region, the Great Plains, the Intermountain West? And no title quickly comes to mind for anyone. There are some smaller, more local memoirs that have been published about being gay, but that bookshelf is relatively empty. And it signals to me that we're still somewhat scared, deservedly so, to talk about this, to talk about being queer, maybe LGBTQ. It's hard. I think if you're growing up gay in Melstone, Montana, that is a hard existence. I mean, I grew up in a tiny town of 600 people. The county doesn't have a stoplight. There's no longer a grocery store. You know, it's lonely. It's hard. And before the digital age that we all live in, I would watch Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, the original one, and Will and Grace on mute in our basement. I didn't even know yet who I was. But there was something so appealing to me about this wider world called New York. I thought it was like this magical land. If you wanted to be different, you had to go there, because it certainly wasn't happening, or so I didn't see, where I was growing up. And I think that's a hard thing. If you're growing up in a place and you don't see a story that reflects your existence, how do you feel like you can live there? How do you feel like you can stay put? You know, and about the only models it seemed for what a man could be where I come from, you could maybe be a school teacher in that small town, but you either worked at the power plant or the coal mine. My grandpa spent his entire career at the coal mine. My mother spent her entire career at the local power plant. Or you could maybe be a farmer or rancher, which means you would have to have land and you would want to do that type of work. And so I became very hell-bent on being educated. I'm a rather obsessive person, not OCD obsessive, but I don't want to tell you the number of drawing pads that I devoted to learning how to draw Jafar as a child. I was like obsessed with wanting to be a Disney animator. And I didn't believe in erasing, because I thought erasing was for peasants, you know, so you should get it correct on the first time. And so, I mean, just imagine little me. I didn't have a black beret, but I had a camouflage beret because I got at the Salvation Army, hunched over my little drawing desk, and then I would just crumple up papers and throw them away. And my big sister, who's a decade older than me, I would take my sketch pad in. It seemed like she could draw Jafar perfectly without even blinking, and I would just be so frustrated and march back to my room and do this. Or it was collecting coins or wanting to be a paleontologist. It always has seemed that there's been some topic or interest of mine that was an outlet or a way of processing something else I was thinking about, largely getting out. And that meant for me going to college. I'm not a person who hard assembly line work, though I've done it for summer jobs. I think that's the hardest thing I've ever done. To do a repetitive task over and over has to be the hardest line of work. I mean, I gave up my left thumb on an assembly line job. I clipped it off like a hunk of butter. It's in this book as well. And I was going to college I wanted to be a symphony conductor. I played saxophone, and your left thumb is your octave key. And so now for 10-year-olds, I can do a magic trick like this, and they believe I can really pull the tip of it sort of makes their eyes bulge like carp and stuff. So that dream went out the window. And I stumbled into an English class with a guy who could recite pages of William Golding's Lord of the Flies from memory. And I just thought, what a way to earn a living. Like, people get paid to read books and then maybe write books. That sounds like it is an incredible way to live. I speak as a college professor. I mean, it's the dream job for me, and to be in a space where you hopefully create environments where people are not only challenged, but safe, to try out different parts of who they are, or different ideas. And that's a great honor for me. But part of that has always been rooted to landscape and where do you feel safe. And I went to school with the same 22 students until my sophomore year of high school, when my parents did an incredible thing. They moved for me. So I grew up in this tiny town. up to a certain point, I wasn't picked on or bullied for my interests. My parents are both all-state athletes, but they got, this tiny little Viking boy who, I remember my mother would sometimes say these things in a sassy way that was funny. Like she was joking, but was she joking? It would be, I had to be first in the 100-yard dash, or I had to be able to do the most pull-ups. And sometimes my mom would say, Taylor, you know what second place is? First place loser, and so it's like, oh my God, you better blast by Cody Borneman in that 200-meter dash or things like this. So I thankfully had a sort of predisposition to being athletic, which I think got me a pass for a while. But then puberty hit, and puberty does weird things to boys especially. They stop wearing gym clothes like athletic shorts because things become more obvious after puberty if the wind blows the right way. And when the other little boys were talking about how all of a sudden girls became this object of fascination, they couldn't be focused or they were so obsessed, I didn't have any of those feelings. And it's not even that I registered I had those feelings about men or boys in my class, though when their bodies started to change, I definitely took notice. But it was one of these things that since it wasn't talked about, I was called gay and I was called, a word that rhymes with tag and begins with an F. But I didn't even really know what those words meant. Because we're talking in the early days of the internet, at least on the frontier of western North Dakota, where, dial up with that paper airplane and then, one of my grandmas would call and boot me off the internet or something. So. And it's not that I would even know how to find that information about what those words meant, but I knew whatever they were, I didn't want to be that. Because the way those other boys in particular said them, I knew that this isn't a good thing. And in the book, and something I want to talk with you about too, in 8th grade, I made a list. And I grew up in a firearm family, and I had this whole list of reasons to live, reasons to die. And the only thing on the reasons to die column was because I'm gay. That's such a horrible reason to think about killing yourself. Any reason to kill yourself is not necessarily a great thing. But if you haven't been following, this year in May, the Trevor Project, which tracks the mental health of LGBTQ youth, in this country right now, it is the highest suicidal ideation rate we have ever seen. Last year, 45% of queer youth contemplated killing themselves. That's horrific. That's 1 in 2. Those numbers are higher amongst trans youth, and they're higher amongst queer children of color. That's a horrific way to grow up. We should all view that as an insult to a society I hope we all want to live in. Being gay is not liberal or conservative. It's who you are. And if part of what we're saying as a society is it's a viable option that you could kill yourself, that is not a society that is not the world I'm trying to create. And so I speak with some experience as someone who thought that was a viable option at a few different points in life that you will read in this book. And then my parents did the incredible thing. They didn't know that I was gay. They knew I was being picked on and bullied, and my mother would take me every week for a half-hour private saxophone lesson in Bismarck, an hour away. Talk about what love looks like. She could have done other things for those solid 2.5 hours, but she would drive me there in the winter or when it was raining or probably when she didn't feel like doing it. And then at some point I had said to them, because a girl that I had gone to school with, her sophomore year, she started commuting to a private school in Bismarck. And I said to my parents during my 9th grade year, either we move or I will commute. And I have an aunt and uncle that lived in Bismarck, and I was even talking with my parents about Could I spend the week there and then just go to, work a part-time job, I don't know, contribute to rent or something? It was so clear to me that where I was growing up was not hospitable to just even my existence. It wasn't even activities. It wasn't even getting picked on for being the only boy in his pastel painting class with about 8 postmenopausal women who thought it was cool, like this little 8th grade boy is here like trying to get that brown trout just right. And that was so fun because it didn't involve anyone my age. And that also became so hard to think if your whole life is only circling around people who aren't going through what you're going through at a certain point, that can be lonely. And I grew up in an incredibly close family. I mean, all 4 of my grandparents lived in that tiny town. It was incredible. I mean, in that part of the world, nature was so present. And I found, as I've said elsewhere, I had an interview on the radio a few weeks ago, and the woman interviewing me, she said, did you have a therapist? I said, oh my God, you don't know my part of the world. Therapy is like chopping wood, or shooting prairie dogs or something. Certainly not talking about what you feel. But it was sort of new for me, because maybe it will be obvious for you if you read this book or if you have. But I didn't know this until a few weeks ago. I had said, I guess I grew up in a landscape big enough to hold what I felt. I mean, I went outside so much. I mean, reading, though my mother's mother was a voracious reader, it wasn't necessarily something it wasn't seen as doing something. Doing something was going outside, which, fine, but if I was reading, it was sort of, why don't you go do something? So I would take my sketchbook and my tackle box, and then I would go fish for, 6 or 8 hours or whatever. So part of the gift that my parents gave me with that is of learning how to pay attention. It might not be through reading, but through landscapes, through having to be out in nature to notice things. And I think that's helped me so much in life to know when others are hurting, or when someone might have a secret that they're not revealing, and I'm not going to out them, but to know that there might be a tender spot there that they might not be voicing. And it was such a gift in that way, since therapists don't exist in Western North Dakota, to at least have great blue heron, or at least have, your relationship is very straight with a badger if it's charging at you. But it was a landscape that could hold what I felt. But there isn't a way to process that. It's only a way of sort of dumping emotion out there. But I want to read this little section for you just briefly about what happened after we moved to Bismarck, because I thought the world had gone from black and white into color. All of a sudden, my class at Bismarck High School was as big as the town I grew up in. People went to the local symphony orchestra. There are 2 colleges. I had friends who wanted to go to the theater with me, or people who actually cared about like student council. Like it was cool to be on student council instead of like nerd or something like this. So this is my first fall at Bismarck High School. We've just moved there. Bismarck at the time is literally 100 times bigger than my small town. It's right around 60 to 65,000 people. So I'll just read this sort of brief section to you here. Sort of prefatory note. Imagine you're looking at like a petition here. We believe that Levi should not change around other men because he's attracted to them, just like straight men shouldn't change in the women's locker room. If you believe Levi should change in the women's locker room, sign your name below. This was the message on a lined piece of notebook paper tacked to a clipboard which circulated in the boys' locker room during my sophomore year of high school in Bismarck. Levi, a boy in my gym class, wore sequin jeans, long beaded necklaces, bright shirts, and a zebra-patterned fedora. The makeup unnerved the football players, confirming for them that Levi was gay, that he must find them attractive, and that he wanted to have sex with them. The foundation on Levi's face was bedrock to his identity. Some days, Levi wore lip gloss. When the girls heard about the petition making the rounds in the boys' locker room, they jeered. The boys, they said, need to get the fuck over themselves. The faces of the boys, large, hulking football players and wrestlers, fired red. The girls, in booming voices, said they'd love to have Levi change with them. When the petition made its way to me in the onion-scented locker room, I looked at the names on the list and committed them to memory. I quietly passed the petition along, but didn't sign it. These were the days when I snuck into our basement, turned on the big screen television, and watched Will and Grace and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. I'd sit close to the television, the volume barely on to avoid detection, and watch the parade of gay characters. I'd see real-life gay men dress and advise straight men, worlds so far away from what I knew. Whenever I heard one of my parents rumble closer to the stairs, I switched stations, maybe to a baseball game or NBC, and slowly turned up the volume. When Levi sashayed in the Art Deco marble and brass hallways of Bismarck High School, the boys stared. They smirked. He smirked back. I envied his fierce independence and his confidence. Being coy was his ace in the hole. The jocks smoldered with hatred. I was trying to fit into a new school, a high school where my class was larger than my entire hometown. I wanted to be me in the way I thought Levi was being himself, but something about me rankled boys, agitated them, or at least it had in center. I learned out of necessity to stay quiet. In Bismarck, I found my friends in band class or selected them by their high grades in Mrs. Lord Olson's English class. That's how I found my friend Paul. Tall and lean, Paul played tennis and was part of a friend group of 3 boys and 4 girls. He started to invite me to hang out with his group of friends. We played Twister or Catchphrase, a word game where people try to describe the clue on an electronic screen without saying the first letter of the clue, using a word that rhymes with the clue or the number of syllables in that clue. When I'd see Paul in class on Mondays, I'd thank him for letting me hang out with his friends. "They're your friends too, silly," he'd say. Had I really had friends before, though? In center, birthday parties felt like placeholders for something else, some filler for a future life I couldn't yet see. Now, in Bismarck, there was a group in my life, friends who started to ask me if I wanted to go to a movie or see a play at the local college. My world suddenly felt wider, like there was room for me. It took 3 days for the Bismarck High School principal, a portly man with a halo of white hair, to put the kibosh on the petition to have Levi change in the girls' locker room. My new group of friends included a tall, blonde boy named Drew. Drew played tuba in band with me and was a lineman on the football team. When he guffawed, everyone went silent, then laughed at Drew's laugh. Throughout high school, Drew and I were on the student council committee together, split the good guy vote for Homecoming King, and screamed together while riding roller coasters on our band trip to Los Angeles. In high school, both Drew and I dated women. By the end of sophomore year, Levi transferred high schools. I felt like a blade of prairie grass again, swaying singularly in the breeze. What you'll find later, the boy I just referenced, Drew, years later, we had lost touch, and he had a wedding announcement online. And Drew's married to a man. We were in the same group of 8, 4 boys, 4 girls. Drew and I are both gay. We never suspected or told each other. I mean, we both dated women. Mine were very short-lived because holding hands and kissing, and if they want to, whenever a breakup would happen, I would always get, "But you're the nicest boyfriend I've ever had." And I thought, it's because I don't want to do other things your other previous boyfriends want to do, other than your hair or something, you know? But it was so shocking, and it's in the book. But when I asked Drew, you know, why didn't we tell each other? And Drew grew up in a very religious family, and he said that. But at the end of his email, he also said, and you saw what happened to Levi. I mean, that just shoved so many of us back in the closet. I can't tell you the number of people who've come back into my life that I haven't communicated with in nearly 20 years, who were having a lot more fun in the locker rooms in high school than I was, you know, and who are out of the closet, and how terrified we all were. Because having a petition circulate for 3 days shows you what side the principal is on, too. And it's a hard row to hoe when you're young and vulnerable and you're just trying to get through. You're just trying to get through. A little bit more I want to tell you about this book, too. I mean, we go everywhere sort of in this part of the world, not only in the great town of Billings, and I was so sad that that water park is no longer over by that exit, or I might have missed it, but it looks like there used to be a water park there. And I would wear, you know, SPF 90 because I turn as red as my hair. But we are not only in Billings in this book, we're also out on the Olympic Peninsula, which is the logging capital of the world. For some reason, I have a preference for vacationing to do my research in extractive economies, like the Bakken oil boom, or, you know, the logging capital of the world, or I love West Virginia, but at 3 p.m., if you're having an early afternoon cocktail on a Friday, you can hear these distant booms, and it's the sound of mountains being blown up so that they can settle over the weekend. I mean, I come from a fossil fuel family. It begins with my great-grandfather on my father's side and continues into current generations. And somehow my family has produced a crunchy granola environmentalist, you know. I was the first person arrested over the Dakota Access Pipeline in Iowa when I was in graduate school there, and that, thank you. It felt, yeah, it just felt really important because I have these 4 barbaric nephews who live in Bismarck, and in 2016, a Duke University study confirmed that the Missouri River is radioactive because of all the oil, chemical, and saltwater spills from the Bakken oil boom. They all flow towards that major source, which waters the breadbasket and other things. And I had been writing letters to the editor. I'd been traveling around the country. I taught myself how fracking works. I only have degrees in literature and English, but it shows if you know how to read, you can even teach yourself some things and have scientist friends or engineering friends who you can confirm it with. And none of it was working. You know, the boom was booming. It was spreading. Towns were not only doubling. A small town, Wofford City, when I graduated high school, was fewer than 1,000 people, and for about an 8-year period, it doubled in size every 2 years. I mean, that does a lot to a town. You might say there's some great money there, but you also need some infrastructure. You need more EMTs. You need maybe therapists for the first time in town. You need more school teachers. You need more housing, all of that, and that takes time. And so the world I knew, sort of impoverished part of the state recovering from the last oil boom in the late 70s, all of a sudden had, as they were calling it, black gold, you know, but there wasn't a conversation about slowing down and thinking what development looks like or what sustainability looks like, or God forbid I say keep it in the ground, you know. But I was trying my damnedest as, you know, a little man to, you know, raise a ruckus about these sorts of issues. And it got to a point where I just thought, my goodness, my nephews are drinking or swimming in radioactive water. And yeah, in August, 6 years ago, I mean, this is almost to the day this week, I was a grad student. I had told my students on a Tuesday, tomorrow I'm going to do something that I might get taken to a place where I don't have a choice of when I get to leave. I was speaking at this sort. Do you understand what I'm saying? And one guy, this big football player for Iowa State, said, Professor Brorby's going to get arrested. And I was just like, okay, I didn't say it, and it was, one of the most expensive vacations of my life. 6 hours in the Boone County Jail at $600, but it was a hell of a good time, though. There was this 83-year-old woman named Hazel who, she is just a badass, and there were Catholic workers who were there, and there were retired professors, and there were ordinary people like me, and it just felt so important to me that I think about my nephews a lot, and I thought, when they're my age, and they bring up something, Uncle Taylor, why didn't you do everything you could to stop that oil boom? I wanted to know that I had tried, that it's very risky when you're a type 1 diabetic. It's very risky to get arrested in general. If you haven't been, I don't recommend it if you're going into it lightly. It's dangerous. You're not in control of your body. And it's dangerous when you're a disabled person, like having diabetes and needing medicine and things like this. So this is just a little bit of the flavor this book has. So you have petitions, you have an obsessed little boy who loves drawing and things like this, and you also get a coming-of-age narrative that I'm the first in my direct line to finish college. And you also get a very intense scene of when I got outed to my parents. And the interesting thing now of having experienced trauma and talking to friends who are psychologists, what's interesting when you've had a traumatic experience, you might not remember, let's say, like the color of that umbrella or anything like that, but you have total recall in certain ways. So I can dictate to you verbatim the conversation the night I was outed, and then the next night what my parents said to me at the dinner table. And it's not a pleasant story. My parents and I do not communicate. I haven't seen them since my grandpa died 5 years ago. And so it's not, what do I want to say? It's not that traditional narrative that Americans seem to crave about how everything turns out happy in the end. Most of the players in this book are still living. Life is long. We don't know what will happen. But every family has its own, this is what I've learned in these book events, is most families have a lot of tension that doesn't always get talked about, and that people go to the grave with certain secrets. And in that way, I wanted to write a memoir that just felt true, because memoir is such a genre where it's addiction and recovery, or it's abuse and liberation. It's sort of the holding ground for really hard narratives. But that's not the only thing my book talks about. It shows basically the full scale of my life rather than a moment in my life. So there is this blow-up moment. But you see, obviously I'm still here. I didn't succeed in killing myself, thank goodness. And life continues. And I don't know how that will wrap up, but it's a narrative that I also wanted for anyone who's, gay at any point of life, or queer, to also know there are risks. That even at this late stage of 2022, this is still a very hard issue, and there might be people you lose along the way. But there are other great moments, just to sort of wrap it up, and then I'd love any questions you have, or anything about the writing. Anything's fair game. My God, I wrote a memoir. You can ask me if I have tattoos. But there are also great sections too. My grandpas were incredible when I came out to them. My grandpa Hudson Bueller, this is about the most unique name you've ever heard. My mother's father's name is Munsadius Hudson Bueller. If you Google the name Munsadius, there are only two that I've seen in existence ever. It was my grandpa and then his uncle. It sounds like a Latin phrase, but my ancestors are peasant Germans from Russia, and so I don't know where those ancestors, they were smoking something I haven't before and got a vision. But when I came out to my grandpa Hudson Bueller, it was in Denny's, in Bismarck on Veterans Day. Well, yeah, yes, exactly. I brought backup, though, and you're going to love this woman. My great Aunt Frances, my grandma's oldest sister, who is a year older than my grandpa, and I thought that's important. You know, she's got age on him. She can always say, I'm older. And they're both Catholic, which I was not raised Catholic. And my great Aunt Frances, who died the other year, she, one of her granddaughters, Bethany, is a lesbian. And so Aunt Frances and I would, she'd say, oh, Taylor, I had gay friends ever since 1942, waiting tables in Mandan, North Dakota, you know, blah, blah, blah. I mean, she's great. She's kind of like a combination of like Betty White, like cute on the outside, but Maggie Smith, like she'd cut a bitch if she had to, you know? So I knew bringing her on Veterans Day was an asset to me. And so we sit down, and Aunt Frances is like, I know what's about to happen. And so we get our meal, and she has some like turkey sausage that she makes into like ground turkey sausage, you know, is just doing this. And I told my grandpa, and he said, Taylor, you know, the priests tell us it's against our religion, but you're my grandson. Screw what the priests say. And it was as easy as if I told him I like pistachio ice cream. I mean, it was just easy, and it was incredible. And my grandpa Brorby was the same thing. I talked with his second wife. He had remarried after my grandma passed, and her name's Jean, and she had said, Taylor, is it okay if I talk to your grandpa tonight, and you should call tomorrow at this time? And so I called, and this, pardon me if I get emotional, but you know, I called, and my grandpa said, Taylor, I know you're going to tell me something really important right now, but before you do, I have to tell you something. You are my grandson, and that's all that I care about. Oh, it just made it easy. We moved on to other things, you know, like what sort of ridiculous woodworking project he was on. It was just as easy as a rippling stream is how it felt. So it's not all intense bombs. But I hope it's a journey. I mean, Corby has read it, maybe some of you have, but I hope it's a textured life and that it reveals some truth about that, because I think sometimes we just try to gloss over the hard parts. So I wanted something that was sort of emblematic, maybe that we all have felt at different points in our lives, of joy, sadness, confusion. I'll take a breath there, and I really hope you have questions for me. I mean, I can keep talking. I'm a teacher, but I would rather help you out or answer anything that's on your mind, too, either about this or topics or Corby.
Okay, so what I thought was interesting when I was reading your book is not that you were gay and coming out, but that you really liked the landscape of North Dakota.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, there's so much in your book about the appreciation of that land.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's North Dakota, if you haven't heard, it's the least visited state in the country. Maybe some of you here haven't even been to the eastern lands, and what's so odd to me about North Dakota, you know, you're all an educated audience, so I can't get away with this as much as I can other places, but name a North Dakota author. Exactly. You know, someone might say sometime, you know, like, what's that? Yeah, Chuck Klosterman. Yeah, my big brother. When I have a beard, I look like little Chucky. And that's incredible that you know Chuck is North Dakotan, because most people give me Louise Erdrich, which, you know, but after that, the list gets way short, way quickly. We're not a literary state, unlike Montana. You're known for your writers. Same with Minnesota. Sinclair Lewis, he got a Nobel, if you haven't heard. And so what I had, instead of a landscape of books, was an incredible diversity in the natural world. I mean, the prairie is the most diverse bioregion on the planet. It is made up of a community of intermingled roots that secure soil in place. It is stunning to me that it produces a monoculture of thinking. when nature signals that we thrive in diversity, the human culture in at least the part of the world I grew up in is very, what do I want to say, white, straight, conservative. And what I'm learning through this book and doing events is that is not the whole story of rural America. But it is so hard in rural America. I had a classmate, one of these 22 people, remember, 16 girls, 6 boys? One of my classmates emailed me. I thought, oh dear God, the other shoe's about to drop. She said, Taylor, I've never read a book so quickly. I loved it. It was incredible. I'm recommending it to all my friends and family. And it revealed to me that you can't paint with a wide brush like we do in the political times in which we're living. But to live in small towns can be an incredible gift. You also have to maybe swallow so much of what you privately think, because you are more dependent on other people in maybe ways me living in Salt Lake City liberates me from. But if you have some opinions that in your small town maybe are unpopular, your life can become very difficult very quickly. It can. I'm not saying it does. But to have that woman share that with me, I thought, oh, thank God. Okay. But that's where I think we sometimes operate in our lives, in these small private moments. We read books, we watch movies, we maybe don't have a lot of people where we live to talk about those things. So we have online communities, or we travel, or things like that. But it is that landscape, Corby. I mean, I still think North Dakota in the golden hour. If you head south of I-94 in November at around 4 to 5 p.m., the way that sun fires that landscape, I mean, it's no drug I've taken has gotten me as high as seeing that. It is, to me, an incredible thing. It's like you're a great painter in this state, Charlie Russell. The fuchsia that he would use in those paintings, that was like a daily occurrence for sunsets where I grew up. And I still love that. You can tell I yammer after I just take a question and make it mine. What else is on your mind? Or what are you, yeah, go ahead.
So I grew up in Fairview.
Okay.
And went to college at University of North Dakota.
Okay.
Was a reporter in Bismarck for a while.
Okay.
And have since left, obviously. And going back is sometimes still really uncomfortable.
Yes.
Because, like you, my life was not what I thought my life would be. I didn't see it anyway, because I thought I'd be a writer. But
Yeah.
I'm a therapist instead. None of those around there either. And what is it like? Do you go back ever? And what's it like? I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a different place even from when you grew up
Yeah.
already,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Just to sort of summarize, in case you couldn't quite hear the question, sort of, do I ever go back and how does that feel, and how have I seen things change? I haven't been back since before the plague times, but I'm going back this fall. So, I mean, this is the longest I've gone without seeing my nephews. It's 3 years. And I'm excited and honestly, though, a little bit more nervous. I mean, there is real risk with a book like this. When you put gay in your subtitle, you don't get to go back in the closet. And it's kind of the privilege of at least being white, is I think right now I'm dressed rather commonly, but like when I'd be like working in the oil boom, I can dress like a straight man, just like it's usually blue jeans and like a gray beat up t-shirt and like a greasy baseball hat, because I don't want to look well put together, because even that, we know this is true in the Yak Valley of Montana. I was visiting a buddy of mine, Rick Bass, up there, and he sent someone to pick me up from the Yak Inn, or I was having the cheapest IPAs you can find, $1.50. It was incredible. And he sent someone in there to get me. I was wearing my chacos. I had khakis on. I had a bright blue Patagonia jacket. He said, Taylor, I got so worried, because he said, if you were in that bar after sunset, things get interesting. And he said, people know you're not from here. And I said, well, how, I look like anyone else. And he just did one of these. And I was like, oh, man. I mean, I hate to feel like I'm feeding into a certain stereotype. But anyone who's somewhat different, or certainly queer, knows you have to be smart at all times. North Dakota scares me. Scares me that my nephews are growing up there. I really wish my sister and her husband moved out of that. To be blunt, though I love this landscape, I do not tend to jive with a lot of the mentality of North Dakotans. I mean, if you want to watch a scary story, go back to 2020 and why not Minot, as the motto is, Minot, North Dakota, their city council meeting. You should see the reaction when one day they flew the pride flag. That is a horrific city council meeting. And this woman comes out publicly, the city councilwoman, is the first openly gay North Dakota councilwoman. I mean, it is stunning. And I mean, I'm going to that city this fall. I'm giving a keynote lecture to the librarians of North Dakota because I just feel like they are frontline workers. And at least now there's a book where you can say, hi, little Billy, read this book. That book doesn't exist otherwise, especially in that place. I mean, it is, I largely stay with my sister. My nephews come along as my research assistants whenever we go into the oil boom, or Uncle Taylor's working on this next book and needs to visit this place. So we'll do things like that, but I honestly don't go out really eating or to bars. I don't go out after, I mean, I just get nervous. And that is a hard place to feel like you can't go home again. I mean, you saw what happened. You went to UND when they changed the name from the Fighting Sioux. That's the weird thing. 2016, their actual Fighting Sioux protecting their drinking water, and the true racism of people who look like me come out. I hear it's violent down at Standing Rock. I went to Standing Rock. It was a great vacation. Some of the best food I've ever had. But when it's a mascot, I mean, I'm Norwegian and Germans from Russia. Those people lost their ever-loving minds because they like a symbol and a myth. You know, it's like the myth of George Armstrong Custer, which if you haven't heard, he had the worst day of his life not too far from here. But, you know, Custer, the more you study him, he's certified dandy. I was never taught that. He wore perfume in his hair. He wore purple leather kid riding gloves. I thought, oh my God, this is perfect. I need to make millions on a gay romance about Custer or something, you know? He kept a bobcat in his basement at his root cellar, if you haven't heard. But it's not just North Dakota, you know that. I mean, we all know that, but it is, at least in my mind, to articulate what rural America is like for queer people still to now, we just have to do better. You don't get to say you love children if 1 out of 2 queer kids last year thought killing them was, I mean, that's a version of, for instance, Christianity I don't understand. If you can get on board with, you know, hating people like me, and then you lament when, you know, a little girl takes her life. And that is the story of North Dakota. The major headlines, there is a Romeo and Juliet suicide act by 2 girls in Devil's Lake a few years ago, 11 and 12. They're girlfriends. One put a rifle under her chin and the other one hanged herself. During the plague, a transgender girl, I want to get that right, in Beach, just across the border into North Dakota, killed herself. Most horrific obituary I've ever read. Had a vibrant online life. Didn't make it to graduate. I mean, it's just, I'm a little bit on my soapbox right now, but it is so why I wrote this book. I just think it is such a bad story we're saying not to stay. That is just not okay to do to children. So anyway, that's my view on North Dakota. If I never had to go there again, I would be okay. I know that landscape better than probably most anyone. I know its history very well. If my nephews didn't live there, I would not go back there. It's just not a place I feel safe. It's not a place to be a writer, that's for sure. And the hard thing, just quick history lesson, then I'll be done with this. We need a question to save me from my tirade. North Dakota at the turn of the 20th century was one of the most socialist states in the country. It was up with West Virginia. There's a state bank, there's a state mill, there's a state grain elevator. I won't even call some North Dakotans anymore conservatives because I don't think those exist there really anymore. I mean, it's now just a version of scariness, but they love having a state bank. They'd never vote for one now, but it happened at one point. And to do that, I mean, someone needs to write a history book, how a state goes from being one of the most socialist to one of the most deep red scary. That is a fascinating line of thinking, and we do it in a few generations. I'm planning to just devote my life to writing about that state because it is a fucking fascinating topic. I swear I keep saying, someone save me, and I'll let you save me here in a minute, but let me just give you a short run. My other joke about North Dakota is it's the testing ground for the country's worst ideas. So if you're watching North Dakota, what they're doing, it's coming to a state near you. So let's begin. Genocide of Native Americans, reservations happen. Damming of the Missouri River for hydroelectric power is what we're told. Not true. It also takes away Native American agricultural land. I grew up swimming 200 feet above ghost towns in Lake Sakakawea. That's a certified to indigenous people to name a lake after an important historical figure and take your land. In the 60s, North Dakota, had it seceded, it would have been the third most powerful nuclear nation because farmers gave over their land to shove Minutemen missiles 6 stories under earth to shoot over at Russia should the day come. The Red River Valley is a monoculture of sugar beets. Topsoil's eroding quicker than you and I take a breath. We also love sugar in our society. It keeps us high and plump and pissy. And then, to my part, we have coal mining. I grew up swimming in a lake that never freezes, and every lake in North Dakota should freeze, and hydraulic fracking. And now today, if you haven't been following, this new technology is called carbon capture and storage. It sounds green. Capture emissions on site. My home power plant, Minn Kota Power, is the world's test site for this. It's called Project Tundra. What it'll do is capture emissions on site, liquefy carbon dioxide. So it won't go upstairs into the atmosphere, but then we'll pump it 6,000 feet under Earth's surface where it'll stay in a layer of rock called cap rock forever. But liquid carbon dioxide, if it meets with any moisture, becomes carbonic acid. And if you and I breathe that, it's fatal. Motors don't work with carbonic acid. We're talking about a potential pipeline revolution of which you can't yet imagine that impacts every state in the country from Maine to California. And liquid carbon dioxide being shuffled through pipelines from Iowa to North Dakota, for instance. So, that's a foretaste of the feast to come. Learn your North Dakota history and you'll have a good guide for what's ahead. But what else can I answer for you tonight? Yes, go ahead.
I grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota for a little bit, born in St. Alexis Hospital.
Ooh.
For a matter of fact. And
I'm a Med Center 1 baby, but yeah.
And the culture there is so far and away different. I lived in Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota, the holy trifecta.
Yes.
The holy shit trifecta. Growing up in Minnesota in a town of 200 people, including the graveyard, it was so ingrained in our brains that gay was so bad. Where looking at our nails wrong was considered something that you
Right.
really killed with.
Right.
And that's terrifying to me. And going into and out of mental hospitals where pretty much everybody there is either questioning or already there.
Yeah.
And it's scary, the amount of the things. And I guess, my family, it's a long story, not getting there. My great-grandpa, Blosser, was gay for all of his life, married a woman after World War II,
Yeah.
honorably discharged, all that fun jazz. Came out 2 years before he died, and unfortunately died with most of the family not there.
Yeah.
And he was probably the most well-respected before that, but they just vilified him.
Yeah.
So, I guess my question to you is, I know that most of my family is probably in the closet one way or another.
Yeah.
My mom just divorced my dad, and was like, I don't know if I like women, and I'm like, you probably do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess my question to you, with the experience that you have in that area with me, how would you support family members who are struggling coming out?
Yeah, thank you. That's an important question, and it's a place I'm always getting put. I don't know your mom. Let's just make imaginary scenarios here. I think family members know if you're safe or not. Already, the idea of your mother must trust you, and how fortunate to have a child that you can say, maybe I like women. That's a conversation I never had growing up. I just came from a family in Rigby, Idaho last night where the wife of the couple is bisexual. Her 14-year-old child is genderqueer. I'm gay. So the minority in the room is the straight husband. It was like, we win, you know. But I was having a conversation with this 14-year-old on a level where it blows my mind. That never, and it's not that I want to feel like I'm an old crank of saying, know how lucky you are to be able to talk, you know. It just is incredible. But to your thing, I think people know if you're safe in these small private ways. I will just say there was something about where I grew up. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't get to come out to my parents. I was outed. There's maybe a reason I didn't tell them. And I was planning to, I was about to go to Princeton Seminary and have a continent between us and to think, okay, maybe if I have a serious boyfriend, then I could tell them. And I'll be far away. Distance makes it safe. I think if people have family members, so first thing, you don't, and I'm not saying this to you, but just Taylor's handy tips. You don't get to out people. You just don't. Even if you, the great thing about 2022 is there are a variety of people. The older I get, there's some straight men that I've met where I'm like, God, really? Like you're not? Because I feed into stereotypes. People take their own time. I have friends who've been, like your great-grandpa, married. And then later, and they will be honest and say, I didn't know until I was 35. I think having conversations out there to just even say, I talk with my nephews about what it's like to be a gay man. Just to know that, one says he's straight, and I'm like, okay, I've got 3 others, we're hoping, but that I just want them to know that no matter, all topics are on the table. I know, you know this, but I'm just telling you what you know, but I think that's what we have to do. You have to be open and comfortable and safe, or to even share other stories. This is what I often do with my nephews. I had a student, I'll say, oh, I had a student the other week. She came in and she told me that, for the first time she realized she likes girls. And it's just as easy as that, because it should be that easy. Because when you have it, I speak with some experience here, I am gay is the most shortest, life-changing sentence you can say. I love you is longer words. And people aren't going to kill you if they don't love you. I don't love you. Maybe those people will. I am gay. It's not a comfortable time to be in Montana for me right now, but I'm here. And I think as long as you're giving off the vibe, and people know that because you've demonstrated it, that allows people to be themselves. But we also have to ask, is it more about you? If you think people are gay in your family, I would also sort of, push that down a little bit. That takes a long time sometimes. Yeah. But that's an important question. Thank you. Yeah.
To follow up on a similar topic, you're not talking to some of your family anymore. None of my family is talking to me right now.
Yeah.
Except for the one other queer person who was disowned 20 years ago.
Yeah.
How do you deal?
Yeah. So the question is, and then let's maybe do one more. We can just, you can talk to me and stuff, but then we can be a little more informal that way. It's an important question. So in case you didn't hear, how do you deal if you've put up boundaries and limited communication with people in your life? And how do you personally deal with that? I won't sugarcoat it. There were points in my life where I was drinking way too much. And there were points in my 20s where, there's a story in here, you'll read it. I got up on a bridge. Somehow a fucking bicyclist came by at the right time and ripped me back. That's like a fucking guardian angel if you've ever, I don't even believe in guardian angels, but that makes a lapsed Lutheran quake a little bit, But, so I'm not here to say, oh yeah, my life's hunky-dory. It still wells up. I hate the cycle of birthdays. I hate Christmas. I hate that 6 weeks from Thanksgiving to New Year's. There's no place like home for the holidays. Well, if home's abusive, there's a lot better place than that. So I think what that looks like, Armistead Maupin taught us this in Tales of the City. It's chosen family. And some family gets to stay around. But it's a hard thing that I just really think just because you begin life with people doesn't mean everyone's along for the full ride. That is not easy. I'm not here to, yeah, but I don't have easy answers to life's difficult questions. You know, and I mean, I will say this though, my life has gotten better every year I've been alive. I meet interesting people. I write books. I get to travel and meet people like you. I mean, this is not to be flip. It's that the focus of joy must be focused elsewhere than where it maybe once was. It's hard. And I appreciate you asking that. Let's do one more. If there's one more. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you like pistachio ice cream?
Woo!
Did your grandfather think?
Yeah. Not on its own, but in Neapolitan, I'll have pistachio ice cream. So, no, but yeah, my grandpa and I prefer Rocky Road to pistachio. So, yeah, thank you for bringing. So, yeah, go ahead.
Mention your grandfather again. I cannot understand how, and I hear this often with people, that the next generation is at least someone within, grandparent or great uncle. I just don't understand how that can happen with your parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then because these are both of your parents.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
don't know what the question is, but
No, I have a sense of what you're asking, because I mean, believe me, in my therapy sessions and elsewhere, I circle around this mulberry bush a lot. The question, the observation is, how can one generation be more accepting or it not being an issue, and then others struggle? I mean, just to be honest with you, today I had to lose my mind on my sister because my oldest nephew called me and asked permission if he could get a job at Chick-fil-A. And I pride myself on being my nephew's favorite uncle because of the competition. They have 3 other uncles, and are you kidding? If you have me, you're losing. But I never get upset at my nephews. But also that, just today, I mean, I had to refocus on my drive over here because it triggered so much in me. I mean, this is a company my nephew knows, believes people like me are less than. And I mean, I just lost my mind on my sister, and she had not known this. And she said, oh my God, we've been having these conversations. And then, well, my sister is even more of a Viking than I am. And so the hammer of Thor really dropped on my nephew. But I just said to her, I said, I don't have time to deal with this bullshit. I said, like, I'm trying out here to keep gay babies alive. And for some reason, my nephew thinks like, well, but Uncle Taylor said I could work there. Then it's okay. I mean, so even now, I will say, even a generation younger than me, I'm questioning. You know, it's this romanticization of young people are so progressive. Not true. Look at what happened with the Supreme Court this summer. There are a lot of students that I've taught that I'm just, oh my God, I thought we all agreed women were human, you know. Half-baked theory to my family situation. My parents have only ever lived 40 miles from their hometown. My father moved there in the 60s because coal was discovered in south central North Dakota, so they moved from the northwestern part of the state. My parents have never had to create who they are because they've been in an orbit where they know everyone. And I have found moving helps a person. You have to be a little bit more open to meet new friends. Or say, oh, I didn't have a falafel till I went to college. I grew up in a part of the world where black pepper is spicy, you know. But, you know, my mom's dad, he was in World War II. My father's father, he now lives in Michigan later in life. He married a woman in Michigan. And my father, who has he and I, if we want to, we can easily silence a room. We just have voices that can really carry. But my father, since he was sleep deprived, he worked the graveyard shift as a welder. I mean, he was just always tired. But even when he'd say like good morning to me, I mean, I'm a very weepy man. I was an even more weepy child. But he would be like, good morning, Taylor. And I would get like tears, 'cause it's not that he was angry. He was just sleep deprived. But I think my parents did the best they could where they were planted. And they were great. Like I said, my mom took me to saxophone lessons. I don't know if age always helps. I'm sure at the end of my grandpa's lives, it's like, I mean, they have seen what happened with me and it's, I just refuse to be abused. And I just put up barriers. These are the conditions. You either accept all of me, or this relationship has met its moment. And that I don't know. But part of it, I think, is if you read a lot, even if you don't travel a lot, but if you read a lot, you realize your views are maybe not the only views. I know, your question is what I've thought about for the last 12 years. Now, August 4th was the 12th anniversary of my outing, my oldest nephew's birthday. And I've thought about this every other day. How does that happen? And I don't have answers. But I have a book. And I think that's why you write, though. I don't know what I know until I write it, and I think that is part of it. So it's even to your question earlier, it's, I'm a writer. I don't have recommendations in those ways. I just have inferences. So it's an important thing, but I don't know. My grandpas just could do something my parents couldn't. And that's as simple as I can make it. Yeah. Let's pause there, shall we? And then we'll chat. Thanks for coming. Great to be in Billings.